actually not going to talk about my new book. That's because you guys are here, you have it. Like, I don't need to sell to you, so I'm going to kind of go professorally a little bit. You give me, you know, I've got university training. You give me a podium, figuratively in this case, and I just will talk about stuff. So what we're going to do today is I actually have some remarks prepared, and that'll be about 15 minutes long. Then we're going to do a Q&A for about 15 minutes, and then we are going to do a reading for about 15 to 20 minutes. The reading's a little bit longer this year, the chunk that I picked, all right? Yeah. There you are. And those of you who are standing up, I've signed a lot of books already because I got here early, so the seats may appear the moment I am done, so you may want to try and grab those ones. So, what am I going to talk about this time? Well, my talk actually starts with my visit to Sharjah earlier this year. Anyone know where Sharjah is? Yeah, that's a good guess. It's actually one of the United Arab Emirates. The famous one is Dubai. Everyone knows that one. So it's next to Dubai. They're kind of like the United States if the United States were a bunch of monarchies instead of states run by Arab princes. So they invited me to come do a book signing. It's right on the Arabian Peninsula, next to Saudi Arabia. And I'm like, free trip to a place I've never been before. I'm sold. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, so what am I going to do at a book signing in Sharjah, right? You know, is anyone going to come to a Brandon Sanderson signing in Sharjah? I had no idea, but I wanted to visit. So I got on the plane. By the way, Emirates Airline, very nice. They flew me over there. I got to go visit the desert. You can look at my Twitter feed. They're really cool. Now, I'm from the desert, but it's not the real desert, right? I'm from the Utah desert, which is like, you know, it's very pretty, but I went over there to sand dunes. Like, dunes. Like, I made Arrakis jokes, and I'm like, I'm walking without rhythm and all this stuff. Which is how you know I'm a nerd, because I didn't make the obvious joke, the Lawrence of Arabia joke. I'm making, you know, I'm making puns about Dune. But I got to do that. It was super cool. And then I went to the signing, and I was a little nervous, right? Remembering my early days where I would go to signings like here at Mysterious Galaxy, and there's nobody there for me except these guys. They buy everyone who comes through, I'm pretty sure. They took pity on me. But I show up, and I walk in, and there is a long line of people in traditional Arab dress. That means for the women over there, they will often wear the hijab, which is the one that leaves the face open, but it's this black costume all around. The hijab's just the headpiece. And the men wear the thob, which is basically the same thing on a guy, but it's white. It's got the white headpiece and then the white flowing clothing. And they're all holding big stacks of Sanderson novels. Like, you guys have to lug around. The ones that you're like, people come to see me at Comic-Con, they're like, you filled my entire bag, and there's only like 2 books in there. And these people have these big stacks. And I was struck in a moment of just kind of awe and amazement at the power of writing, of the written word, because this is all the way across the world for me, right? This is a very different culture from my own, and yet there are people who are reading the goofy things that I wrote and loving them. These are my people, right? My tribe was right there. In fact, one of the ladies in line was telling me about how she'd just gotten back from Comic-Con in Dubai. And, you know, she went as No-Face from Miyazaki films for a night. Because if you think about it, that person's all black, and so she just put the mask on and she thought she was very clever. It's a very efficient costume. And like, these people are my people. It was so cool to be able to connect with them. And, you know, it had set me thinking about how, you know, I can read books from 3,000 years ago, and I can read what was in someone's mind from 3,000 years ago in a completely different world and culture, and I can feel the things they were feeling at that moment. The written word is very, very powerful. And so, of course, naturally, this started me thinking about King Sejong the Great. Right? Yeah. Naturally. King Sejong. Sejong is one of my favorite historical figures. King Sejong is 1400s king of Korea. Right? And he's very famous in Korea. He's kind of like their George Washington, one of their great figures from the past. King Sejong, when he ascended to the throne, he did this really cool thing. He gathered a bunch of scholars in secret, really quiet. He was very, very spy-like about this. In fact, he's kind of like the Jason Bourne of ancient Confucian scholar kings, right? Because he gets all these people together, and he goes to them, he says, I want you to come up with a new writing system. Now, there's a story behind this. In Korea at the time, they used Chinese characters to write with. Anyone here speak Chinese? Chinese is a really awesome language. The cool thing about Chinese characters is they're logographic, right? That means they just represent an idea. You can't really sound out a Chinese character, but like different cultures can use the same character and they mean the same thing. If you need to write bathroom in Chinese, someone from China, someone from Japan, someone from Korea, Mongolia, Thailand, they can all read this and be like, oh, that means bathroom. But the thing about him is, and I apologize, this is why I ask if anyone speaks Chinese, because I'm really bad at Chinese. The thing about it is, Chinese is really kind of difficult. Chinese is like, oh, I always forget this one. I think it's that. Chinese is this very complicated system of writing that requires you to just memorize a bunch of stuff, and you can't really sound it out, right? This was a problem for King Sejong's people. That says Korea, by the way. It's a problem. It says it very poorly, by the way. I write sloppily in the English. Wait till you get me writing in another language. And I'm sure I missed a mark on these somewhere. So King Sejong says, my people can't read this. You gotta be able to read Chinese. You gotta memorize thousands upon thousands of characters. Beyond that, this doesn't actually represent the Korean language real well. You can't conjugate Chinese. At least as I understand it, you don't really conjugate, but Korean, you conjugate. You put things in tenses. You add possessives. You do all this stuff that you just don't do the same way in Chinese. And so it was really bad at writing the Korean language. You couldn't write it out the way the Koreans spoke. Another reason they couldn't talk. And so King Sejong's secret group of scholars got together, and they came up with this really cool idea. And this was to come up with a writing system where you could build kind of a Chinese character that out of phonetic alphabet. This is Han, Kuk, that's Hanguk, that's Korea. And you can phonetically read it, but it took each of these they build like little syllables out of letters instead of just stringing the letters together, so that they fit among the Chinese characters on the page. And you can just drop out a Chinese character and plop in the Korean writing, which looks super cool. It's really ingenious. In fact, it was the inspiration for Elantris. The writing system and the aeons and the magic in Elantris came from the way that Korean and Chinese work together, because these days over in Korea, they use Chinese whenever they want to act real cool, right? Right? Because the Chinese characters are cool, and so you write your name in Chinese, and then you're like, Brandon, Chinese characters, went to the store in Korean. You're like, look at the cool Chinese that went to the store. The newspapers are sprinkled through with these characters, which is like, foreign policy in Chinese, and then the rest is in Korean. Stuff like that. Just, it looks very nifty. And it's actually a little bit more specific. You can't have, this you can have homophones, and this, you can look at it, you're like, I know exactly which Han that is, and there's like 7 of them. So it's really cool interrelation. They could use this when they needed to get specific, use this. It's great. King Sejong then takes this together. A lot of people, the rumors are that, he created it himself. He had help, we just don't know who it was. But he brought it to the court, he presented it to them, and their response was that they hated it. They hated it. I'm going to read you one of the responses of one of the prime scholars in court, and I'm going to read it in English because I can't read the Chinese. It's really hard. He said, "How could this not be a setback to our civilization? Spending too much thought and effort on this is a waste of time, detrimental to the timely pursuit of scholarship." Yes. Any guesses why the court didn't like this? Yeah, you got it.
It was too easy to learn. It would allow the lower class to understand writing that only the upper class knew.
That's it exactly. That's it, 100%. At the time in Confucian society, if you could read Chinese, it was a mark of nobility. And the best jobs went to the people who could do Chinese tests really well. And it was this whole thing that the nobility read this hard language system and the common people did not. And this is actually a theme through history. It's not just in Korea. Now, this took off. King Sejong got the people using it. A king a few generations later tried to ban it. Did not work at all because everyone loved it so much. In fact, Korea is often listed as one of the most literate populations on the planet because of how easy their writing system is. It's often credited for that. You can learn it in an hour, and it's considered one of the easiest to learn, and the most regular of spelling and things like that. It's very cool. But this whole idea of stopping people from reading, that's happened throughout history. You can read about the troubles people had translating the Bible into English. People got burned at the stake for that. You can read about the resistance to literacy programs in the and early 1900s. We're like, oh, people don't need this. Why are we spending all this money on this? It seems like throughout history, there have been people who want to stop other people from reading. And you're all nodding. You're like, we're book people. We get it, Brandon. Why are you telling us this? We understand. Well, I think that we kind of might have some problems with this sometimes in our culture. In our specific culture. I'm gonna read you a quote by a blogger that I was reading. Her name is Bonnie Burton. She says, as a geek girl, I've been accused of wearing a Star Wars t-shirt to get attention from guys. I've been told to step to the side and let real gamers play demos at conventions. Lately, it seems elements of geek community have become a lot less of a welcome wagon and more of a judgmental Jedi council that refuses to let newbies in, especially if they happen to be girls. In a community once known for celebrating outcasts and underdogs, it sometimes now seems like you have to take some sort of voight comp test to prove your geekdom is legit. And just to prove it, she threw in a Blade Runner reference. So we actually have some of this. I've noticed as geek culture goes mainstream, something inside of me that is like, I was a fan before all you people. And you people aren't real fans. You know, I've done this with comic books many a time. I remember reading my old Eastman and Laird Ninja Turtle comics. And when it became the famous popular thing, I'm like, that's not Ninja Turtles. My Ninja Turtles is Ninja Turtles. And I think it goes beyond that, though. It goes into kind of, seems like the community really likes to shame people for loving what they love. I've done this. Anyone made fun of Twilight? Yeah. Aragon, right? Something gets popular and brings a lot of outsiders toward our community, and our response is sometimes, you're not real fans. And this bothers me inside of myself. It bothers me about our community because I do think we should be one of the most inclusive communities out there. And now, I'm not saying we can't poke fun at things. I'm not saying we can't criticize things. In fact, you know, if we couldn't criticize things, basically the English major that I have would be useless. You know, it is important to criticize. It's important to say, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, and I think this is why. I'm not talking about the criticism side, I'm talking about the shaming side. And I felt a ton of this in my university program. I got an A- in one of my classes in my master's degree from a professor when I was submitting The Way of Kings. It's done pretty well. He gave The Way of Kings an A- because he said, I just shouldn't be writing this fantasy crap. And he couldn't bring himself to give me a full A. Yeah. Oh, it doesn't care about paychecks. I felt a lot of this. I had to fight for the genre, and then to get to the genre and have people doing the same thing inside the genre itches at me. It's not about scholarship, it's about shaming. And I would say you still can criticize things, but when it transcends into mockery, which is like what the internet is doing to us, we just rip into things. Our discourse stops being, I don't like that and this is why, to this sucks and you suck. And that transition is terrifying me. And that is what's happening to our community. And I look at things like this trip to Sharjah, where, you know, the books are meant to bring us all together. The purpose of fiction is so that we read them and we understand people different than ourselves. That's what I think one of the main points of fiction is. And my suggestion to you is next time, you want to make fun of somebody for what they're reading, maybe try reading it yourself. You don't have to like it. Your goal in reading it is not necessarily like, maybe you'll love it. Maybe you're like, wow, I'm a twihard and I never knew it. But the point in you reading is to understand that person that you know that loves it. And your job is to find out why. Read it with that intent, and I think the fiction will accomplish its purpose of bringing us together instead of making us divisive. Thank you. All right, time for announcements. First off, I have Mistborn earbuds. Mistborn earbuds. All right. The rest of them are going to go to people who ask questions in the Q&A, and then from there on, they will go to the first people in line who signed up and got their numbers early. Okay. So, but I'll throw them. I'm going to try not to hurt anybody. These are so cool. These were produced. Gummy bear incident. These are produced by the people who do the audiobook. They do a wonderful job with my audiobooks, and so they sent them along to have me remind you all that audiobooks exist. Let's go down our little list. We have the Elantris 10th anniversary. They are going to order more copies of the Elantris, and I talked about in my blog the leather-bound edition. Mysterious Galaxy, assuming they want some, will have those. There will only be about 5 stores that have those. So if you're wanting a leather-bound edition of Elantris, they're going to be around $100. So they're pricey. So if that doesn't appeal to you, go get the paperback. It's cheap. But if that appeals to you, you can talk to these guys. We'll make sure they have enough supply of those that you can get them if you want them. I haven't cleared that with them yet, but yeah. I would like you all right now, you got a Post-it or multiples. If you didn't get a Post-it, you will get one. You don't have one yet? They're going to be Post-itting the line. Who did that before? Were you doing that?
I did that.
Oh, you did that. You just did it as a thank you to me? Okay, you're going to...
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. No, they assigned you. They assigned you.
No, I volunteered.
You volunteered. When you get your Post-it, you're going to write on it the name of the person you want the book personalized to. You do not have to get it personalized to anyone. If you just leave it blank or if there's no Post-it, I will just sign it, okay? But if you will hand me this, when you get your poster, when someone sticks it on, the best place for it is right here, because I sign right here, so it's good to read the name and write it right here. But when you do this, just be careful not to go like that. If it sticks to this and to this, then when you close your book, it'll fold the page. And so I've had that happen to people. So, oh, that's my Post-it. I need that. So just like that, make sure you get up to 3 personalized books per person. So if you came in a group of 12, then yes, you could have a whole bunch. Yeah, but so if you brought 7 books, I'll still sign the other ones. The personalization is what takes the time and things like that, so I limit those to 3. So just put the 3 that you want personalized on the top with the name in it, and if they're all the same name, you could write ×3. But just make sure that one's on top, because if I hit a book without a Post-it, I will just sign it, okay? And then once I'm done with the 3, I'll sign the rest of them. And you can put a Post-it in each one if you're neurotic about it. That's fine too. It's actually easier on me if there's a Post-it in each book that's supposed to have a name. Okay? Pictures. Do we have someone assigned to take pictures for me? We will. There will be a person. Where's the line going to be? Is this going to be straight?
So we're going to ask everyone.
Yeah.
We're going to ask everyone to
Not right now.
line up outside numerically by the number on the back of your receipt, and then we bring the line in and it sort of wraps around, follow just the orange wall.
And it comes this way?
Yeah, it goes this way. So
okay.
Right,
yeah, okay, so there will be probably someone on this side grabbing the camera.
Yeah.
What they're going to do is, I'm going to start signing your books. We do the picture first. By the way, you don't need to do a picture. If you want one, I'm happy to do it. You get in position. They will count. I will look up on 3. Like a trained dog. Ding! Go back to signing, and then we start talking, right? When you come through, if you have a question, you can ask it. You don't have to have one. I usually ask just in case. but people are like, oh, I didn't think of one, I'm so embarrassed. You don't have to have questions, okay. And so that, the last thing I need to announce is my mailing list. I don't make people sign up here because I feel like that's annoying pressure stuff. Like, here's my mailing list. Do you love Brandon? Yeah, thank you. But on my website, in my contact form, you can sign up for my mailing list. We send about 4 mailing list emails a year. Always includes an unreleased scene from something I'm working on, as well, and as a thank you for letting me tell you that I've got a new book coming out. So if you sign up for that, you get that sort of stuff. And we will also, if you mention where you live, anytime I am within about 50 miles of you or so, you will get an email from me saying, I'm going to be here. Did anyone get these today? Yeah. So this is a good way to keep track of where I'm going to be. We don't spam you. We use MailChimp. It's very effective and efficient. You can unsubscribe very easily. So if you want to sign up for that, that's how you do it. I am going to go to the Q&A and throw earbuds at people, and I'm going to do this by region. So this way, you don't have to raise your hands all the time. So we'll do the sitting people first. All right, purple hat.
Yeah, I'm also had problems as an English major with creative writing and fantasy, and I'm just wondering, like, how do you get past that? Like, because I'm also trying to go into
how do you get past the professors and people?
And it's the same with research.
The first thing you should do as a writer is you should listen to what those people are saying and teaching and try to learn from them. I think the strength of fantasy and science fiction as genres is that people think they think the wrong things about our genre. You can find literary writers in science fiction and fantasy. N.K. Jemisin is doing amazing things with literary fantasy right now. You should be, reading her books. They're fantastic. Gene Wolfe, Ursula Le Guin. They imagine that fantasy is way more strict than it is. So if you take a class from someone, see what you can learn from them. That's the first thing. The second thing is, don't back down. Write what you want to write. And don't let them talk you out of loving what you love. Go ahead and try new things, but apply it to what you think is going to help you, and be willing to take the grade hit for it. That's my recommendation. All right, I'm going to toss this. They're kind of heavy, so watch out, all right? All right. Whoa!
So next month is National Novel Writing Month.
Yes.
Do you have any advice for amateur writers who are just jumping into this endeavor with really experience?
Okay, NaNoWriMo. I did this for many years before I got published. I was already writing, and my friends were all doing it, so I'm like, yeah, I'll keep going, and then I won't tell you guys my word count because you'll feel bad. We always had like a race where we posted it on a website, and I just kind of posted what the daily count was supposed to be. I often doubled it because I was like this even back then. I would say for you to number 1, don't let the word count goal intimidate you. If you don't hit 50,000, the whole goal is just to get you out of your writing comfort zone. So for you, 25,000 is where you're going, and you actually still do that, that's fine. 50,000 isn't a novel anyway. They just say it is. Right? I mean, it's technically a novel, but I mean, how many novels are 50,000 words? There's not very many. A lot of middle grade is around 50,000 words, but I would just go for it. The other thing is, have a daily habit of when you're going to write, and try to make that sacrosanct and get into this habit of, I'm writing for these 2 hours, and kind of unplug during those 2 hours and write during those 2 hours. Worry less about what your word count is you're hitting, but do try to not self-edit. That's the biggest thing that's going to help you. If you're not going back and revising and you're pushing forward, the goal is to teach yourself to finish something and to push forward and turn off your internal editor. All right? All right, here we go. Oh, I'm throwing it too lightly. All right, right here.
What is the worst writing advice you've ever gotten?
What is the worst writing advice I've ever gotten? No. The thing about writing advice is, most people who are giving writing advice, it works for them, which means it's actually good advice to try out. The only really bad advice is, this is the way it must be done, right? Because different writers have very different approaches. He mentioned Stephen King. Stephen King can't write with an outline, so he says don't outline. Orson Scott Card says, I've got to have an outline or my book stinks. Both of those can't be right. Well, one of them might be right for you. The truth is, most writers I know don't outline some things, do outline other things, and come up with this like Frankenstein of different pieces of advice that work for them. Though the absolute worst thing that I ever heard, and I'm not going to say who said this, they were telling my students while I was teaching them, my students came in and said, what do you think of this? To include a glossy headshot with every submission. To get the attention of editors. But to not include a SAISY, a self-addressed stamped envelope, back in the days, you know, where we did this all in print, because if they liked it enough, they'd track you down. Yeah, it was really bad.
When you spoke in Dubai, did you speak in English and was it translated to all these?
Yeah, good question. So when I spoke in Dubai, was it translated? I speak in English. Yes, they actually had headphones for everybody, and I spoke in English, and they had an interpreter. I got to do a speech kind of, you know, like this, and there was a guy there who's like, fantasy's not real. So it was actually, he actually said that, and the people in charge were like, oh, it's okay, we're sorry, we didn't mean to offend you. And I was like, oh no, I'm ready. Which is why I gave my little speech on why fantasy is awesome, and it was super cool. But they did interpret it. Yep. All right, we will go right back there.
Yes, going back to your opening statements, and since you have boys, I'm concerned about the fact that in our society, especially online society, people don't show what Neil Gaiman talks about, the respect we should show to each other, and that we have a highly politicized, highly polarized, and snap judgments. And you have young boys. I have a young son and daughter. Yeah. What advice would you give, since you've thought about that?
I've thought about it a lot. I don't know if I've come to any conclusions. Like, if you guys followed the whole thing in science fiction with the Hugo Awards, like, people on both sides were good friends of mine. And, you know, you talk to them in person, and they're rational. They're like, here's my problem with this, and this is kind of why I think it should change. And it's like, wow, that's cool. You talk to the other side, and they're like, this is my problem with this and why what they're doing. You're like, that's cool. Then they talk online, and your screen starts on fire. And I actually wrote big emails to both the sides, and to my friends on both sides. I'm like, be more rational. And then their answer was, but they're not being rational. That's always the answer. And I wrote to them, they're like, but they're not being rational. And I think that, I don't know. I wish that I had the answer, because it's sometimes, you know, I would think it's writers who are supposed to be really open-minded to other people's ideas, because that's why we write books, is to explore ideas. But you know, you can be open-minded and still disagree. And I think that's the most important thing that I try to get to my kids is, you don't have to agree, but just listen first. Try to understand why they're saying what they're saying, and then if you disagree, just fine. That's great. We are all going to disagree. It's part of what makes us people. We argue about stuff. I wish I had answers. All right, I'm going to throw this back to you, and I think you were the one I promised could ask a question. So I'm going to toss this. Hey, watch out, Purple Hat. Okay. All right, I'm gonna huff this next one. It's gonna get there.
I was just totally different topic. Of all your books, I've enjoyed all of your novels. Who is your favorite audiobook narrator who has narrated your novels?
It is Michael Kramer. And that's a bias of mine, because having listened to a lot of the Wheel of Time books in the early years, I fell in love with Michael and Kate's reading styles, and so I've asked for them specifically on several of my projects. I sometimes like to have somebody different for different books, just to have some variety in case there are people who don't like that, but they will continue probably to do Mistborn and Stormlight, because they're my favorite readers. I'm actually not going to huck this. Can someone please? Okay, you can have one for yourself, and then run one to everybody that, so this is the gentleman in the beard right back there. Okay.
You don't want to kill Cookie Girl?
Yeah, I don't want to kill Cookie Girl. Okay, we're going to do this side right now. So we'll go behind the table first. Yeah.
So when you're developing out your magical system for the book, what process do you go through? Because they're fairly intricate compared to a lot of other...
It's a good question. So the question was, how do I develop my magic systems? I could give you 3 lectures on this, and I have done it before. Fortunately, I wrote it all down. So I've got a couple resources for you. This goes for anyone who's interested in writing. At my website, BrandonSanderson.com/writing-advice. Writing-advice. There are 3 resources on there. The first are my essays on magic systems. I've done 3 essays so far. My speech last year was my 4th. You'll have to find that online somewhere. Sanderson's Zeroth Law. I named them after myself because, I mean, Asimov did it, right? I don't think he actually named them after himself. Those are going to talk about magic systems and how I developed them in depth. The other resource I have for you is Writing Excuses, my podcast. Thank you very much. 15 minutes of writing advice every week. Start with January of this year. I think they get better and better as we've gone along, and so this year's are better, and we started kind of a new thing. And then the last thing is, if you're hardcore and you're kind of masochistic, you can watch my university lectures, which are a little more boring and dry. They're an hour and a half long. There's 13 of them. They're linked on my website, and I make the university let me record them and post them online as part of having me in there to teach.
They're not boring, right?
Yeah, they put them back up. Well, yeah. They took them down for a while because we put them up, and then the copyright department, who was like, "No, we have to post these," or like, "We have to look through them and make sure you don't disparage the university." It's the guy behind the thing, and so they went and looked through them, and and then they put them back out. So if those ever go down, there's also the ones at a website called Write About Dragons, which is one of my students recording it for me. Okay, in the blue.
What was your favorite character to write?
My favorite character to write is whoever I'm writing at the moment. I don't usually pick a favorite. Yep, run it. You're going to run all of these. You can get one free one to run one to somebody. He's going to hop around and give them to people. I don't have a favorite character. In fact, here, take these, and then the people I point at, you can go give them. And I don't usually have a favorite book. People ask that a lot. It's like choosing a favorite child. All right, other questions over there? Alaska dude.
Is there anything that you've read recently that you are championing? Like,
oh yeah, some stuff that I really liked recently. If you haven't read NaNoWriMo's book Uprooted, that came out in the summer, it is delightful. It's you guys got copies of that, I hope. It's like a dark fairy tale written for an adult audience. And so we get a lot of fairy tale retellings that are kind of YA or middle grade targeted. This one's, she's got Polish descent. She kind of picked, there's no specific fairy tale. She just came up with her own. And it's wonderful. It's a little romancy. It's got some fun magic, and it's kind of dark, but highly recommended. Brian McClellan, my old student, Promise of Blood. He writes fantastic stuff. And I'm jealous of his magic system. It's really good. What else have I read recently? Nora Jameson's new book. I mentioned that. If you like literary style stuff, what's that one called? Jameson. I just read it, but I read it on ebook. Yeah, 5th season. And it's got a character's viewpoint is in the second person, and it works. So it's the only thing I've ever read in second person that works. It is so good. There's a few for you. Some of my classic favorites, if you haven't read them, are Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinci. It's the closest thing to reading Dune again that you will ever have, right? It's got that same epic world building, really cool kind of epic scope in a science fiction novel, and I love that book. So there's a few for you. All right, in the black.
As a college professor without a writing schedule, I have this burning question for years. How and when do you manage to sleep? You read and write and have a family?
Yeah, so I'm not allowed to talk about the clones. But no, I have a good. I set a strict schedule. And what I do is I get up at noon because I'm a writer. And I'll write from noon until 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock until 8:30 or 9 is family time. And that's sacrosanct. I don't do anything else during that time except hang out with the family. I play video games with the kids. By the way, if you've got like a 7, 8-year-old, Terraria, great for kids because you can get them on tablets and you like sit them next to you and then it works really well. It's like an easier Minecraft, and so we play games. I go out with my wife. We do stuff like that, and then at about 9 o'clock, the kids are in bed. We're usually back, and then I go back to work. And I work from about 9 o'clock until as long as I need to work to get my work done that night. And when I'm home, that schedule works very well. It can give me up to 12 hours of writing time in a day if I'm really crunching on something. Since I don't have a commute, it actually, I get that extra time in my day. And when I don't have a time crunch, then I can be done by like 2 a.m. and play some video games or something. So it's actually, I have a very, my mental health is good. I'm not, you don't have to worry about me not sleeping and things like that. On tour, all bets are off. These things usually get done at about midnight or 1 a.m. And I often have a flight the next morning at 8. So on tour, I just don't sleep. And I usually don't eat either, but that, I've got plenty of storage. I haven't actually had any food today yet, because you get up, you run to the airport, your gate's getting called, you get on it, you get driven right to this school. Yeah, it's crazy. But they're going to give me some shawarma or something for me to take to my hotel. So there you are. Let's go to in the back. Miss Cloak Dude.
I was wondering, does Roshar experience storms outside of the high storms and the weepings? And if so, how often would like Shinovar get them?
So the weather patterns are so dominated by the high storms that non-high storms are rare, but do occur. The further to the west you get, the harder it is to tell the difference between a high storm and a regular storm. Like in Shinovar, a high storm is just kind of like it feels like what a storm you might get here, or even weaker. But they do happen. They're going to happen most often. You're going to notice them in the quote-unquote summers, when the high storms are further apart. So here's another stack of them for you. All right, Memory Keeper.
So I was wondering, what planet did humans originate on, or did they originate on Scadrial when Preservation and Ruin got together?
Humans did not originate on Scadrial, because they were on Yolen, which is a planet before Adenalsium. The story there takes place before Adenalsium was shattered. They may have been on other planets, but the very first ones you would care about are probably on Yolen. All right, yep. So, okay, with young man hopping up in the air.
Write non-fiction books?
Do I write nonfiction books? I have not written any full nonfiction books yet. My nonfiction is my class and my podcast. Maybe someday I'll do a writing book. Shadow. Oh, that's true. We did do it. We did do one called Shadows Beneath, which is where we wrote. My friends and I each wrote a story, and then we wrote about why we did that story the way we did. So all of my nonfiction is like articles about writing. So maybe someday we'll do something else, but that's kind of where I am right now. All right, right here.
All right, so there's not a lot of Western books coming out these days. Is there anything in particular that made you decide to set Alloy of Law and the other books in that time period, and any challenges moving into that time period?
So there aren't a lot of Westerns. What made me do that, write it there? It's hard to say, to reach back into my my cultural archive, so to speak, in my head. Like, I did watch a lot of spaghetti westerns during that era. I think they're cool. But I really think it was more the wanting to deal with something in the early 1900s because I love that era. That era in our world was like this era of scientific discovery. It was this revolution that happened right around that time with the coming of electric lights and the coming of motor cars, where for the first time science was a thing for everybody. Like before that, science was a thing that somebody rich got to do, and then it became something like, I remember reading an essay that was written in like 1910 about a scientist who'd gone and studied ditch digging. He'd gone in there with the ditch diggers and he taught them, he found out the science of what makes ditch digging easier on their bodies and on their health and faster. And he scienced ditch digging for the ditch diggers. And they loved that. It made their jobs much easier. It was a time where science was like that. It was the first time that science was like that. I'm going to step back, I'm spraying. And so that time period really fascinates me because you've got this whole, my career is based around taking cool things in superstition and that have like 1 foot over there and 1 foot in science, and kind of bringing those two things together. And that fascinates me, and that was a time period where we were transitioning from superstition towards science, and that's really cool to me. So I wanted to do something that time period, and the Western aspect was just a fun part of it. The whole pitch of, Clint Eastwood has to move to big city New York and take over, his house politics was really interesting to me. All right, I'm only doing the standing up. You can ask your question, but I have to do it by reading. I can't have time for everybody. I'm sorry. I have to. Okay, in the red hair.
Out of all the characters you've written, which one do you think is the most like you? And is there one you want to be like?
I would say that there are none that are specifically most like me. There's a piece of me in every one of them, and it's been very hard for me to determine. If I had one that I think the best of, it's probably Sazed, maybe Dalinar. But I sure wouldn't mind being as clever as some of them are. And you laugh at that because you're like, you wrote them, Brandon. But the thing about being clever, and I have some clever friends. I lived with a guy named Ken Jennings for many years in college, and his brother's just as smart as him, and our mutual friend Earl. They all were on like Quiz Bowl in college together. He won the Jeopardy thing. He did like 80 in a row. And Ken and people like this, what really makes them smart is the speed of thought. They just snap off a retort just like that. And if you get them together, it's this weird thing where like space-time seems to warp around them, and they start one-upping each other with references and cultural jokes and things like that. And you just step back, and it's like they're their own power source. A random 80s inside jokes just going at each other. And that's what really makes someone witty, is the ability to pop it off. That's not smarts, that's witty in a book. Now that they're also very smart. But in a book, you can emulate that by giving yourself 3 hours to think of what the perfect response is, and then writing it in the book. And then they just came up with it, and everyone thinks you're brilliant, when you're really just, habitually that person's like, that would have been smart. That's what I should have said. Well, you can do that. All right, we're going to go to this crowd in the back. Will there be a follow-up to the arithmetist? Let's go down the list, okay? So, I am writing Stormlight 3 right now. So, Stormlight 3, our goal is for next fall. You can follow along on my website. The projection for me finishing right now is like April, which is going to put it really tight for next fall. But you can follow along. If I get done before April, then we can get it out in November. If it's after April, it's iffy. Otherwise, they would probably wait till January. You usually skip December because it's just so crazy for bookstores. You don't want to be sending new books into them in December. So if that happens, then it'll be another January release or something like that. I have this Bands of Mourning, the next Mistborn book, in the queue. I have Calamity, the next Reckoner's book in the queue, and I have the 5th book of the Alcatraz series in the queue. Those are coming out. Yeah, we got the rights back, and we can start publishing the Alcatraz books again in January. So we'll be re-releasing the first 4 with new cover art. It's really cool. We're trying something out with these books as an aside. We did this really cool full-color map, and we're putting it on the inside of the jacket flat thing. So you can take off the jacket while you're reading the book and see the map. And if this works, we want to try it with Stormlight, where you can take off the jacket and see the map. It's just printed in full color on the back. But we want to make sure it looks nice, that it doesn't that everything works with it. And so we're going to have this cool map that you can take off the jacket. We've got the cool map back there. And then the 5th book will be in June.
And you'll be coming to sign.
I will be coming to sign sometime next year. I don't know when it'll be, but I will come to sign sometime next year. By the way, as an aside, this is what I do. Those books that I just listed are all collectively shorter than a Stormlight book. You can add the word counts. 2 Mistborn books, 1 Reckoner's book, and Alcatraz, plus a novella. All were written last year, and this year I've only been writing Stormlight, and I'm still only, anyway. Once I finish Stormlight, the next project will be the new YA series for Random House, following the Reckoners. It will be a new thing. I will write one of those. I will probably write Arithmetist 2. I'll probably write the last Wax and Wayne book, and then I will go to Stormlight 4. So those will be my 3 projects that I do in between. So if the book you're waiting for a sequel to wasn't on that list, I will get to it eventually. But it's not on that list, and that's like the list for the next couple of years. Okay. Not yet. All right. Let's do in the blue shirt there.
So there's the game Mistborn Birthright that's been developed for a few years now.
Mistborn, the video game.
Yeah.
I love the guys who are working on it, but if I were you, would consider it vaporware until you hear more.
That's
They've had some real troubles with their company. They're great people who just have not been able to get the game going. And they make a lot of easy, quick games for movie tie-ins, but this one isn't easy and quick. And so it's just been a lot harder for them to get going. They're fantastic people, and I hope that they'll get something going eventually. But I'm not going to talk much about it until they do. Since someone's going to ask the movie things, so Sean Levy owns The Reckoners. Optioned that in June. He did Real Steel, the Richard Matheson story. If you haven't seen that movie, it turned out really well with Wolverine in it. He also did the Night at the Museum films. And they're working on a screenplay. DMG owns The Emperor's Soul. They were producers on the latest 2 Iron Man films, and they're a Chinese company. They really liked Emperor's Soul, so they came in and optioned that from me. We have the Mistborn books are with the people who have the video game rights. We combined those together into one right. I gave them a year to work on that. They've been very encouraging on how they're working on that, but it's Hollywood, so who knows what will happen. Legion just lapsed, so if your uncle makes movies, tell him to Legion from Brandon. Stormlight is under contract, but I can't say who yet. So I think everything novel-wise except for Arithmetist is probably, because somebody optioned the Cosmere minus Mistborn. They got really excited by this whole, wow, it's a shared universe thing, which are really hot in Hollywood right now. And they're a really good company, but they came to me and they're like, we can do Marvel with fantasy. I'm like, I'm not going to say no. We'll see how it turns out, but that's where we are. So, all right, in the hat.
For your story of Legion, are you planning on doing another short story?
Oh yeah, good question. I am planning a 3rd Legion short story, and then I'll probably let that one lay fallow for a while. I don't know when I'll do that. It might be next year. I didn't list novellas. I usually do a novella every year. And so we'll see. It might be Legion next year. Just kind of wrap that up. Not that it's going to really be an ending because those are very kind of episodic, but it'll be the end of writing those for a while. All right. Other questions right here.
Any advice for finding a good constructive writing group?
Good constructive writing group. Writing groups, your best bet is to find somewhere where, like at a convention, that's doing writing critiques, and get in on one of the group critiques that happen there. They're usually led by like an author or somebody, and see who's giving good critiques, and then approach them and see if you can start something up. I would say that's the best. University classes, if you can get into one of those, as well. Some sort of writing class where you can kind of get a preview for how people critique and things like that. That's your best bet. Conventions or writing classes.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to stop now. I'm sorry. So.